Why, hello there. It's me, Jeremy, your favorite bald dude telling you about Standard and Strange, a store and a brand with simple rules. Sell clothes they themselves would wear, manufacture it ethically, and build it to last. From boots made in Oregon to loop wheel garments made in Japan, find all the best clothes for your wardrobe at Standard and Strange. StandardandStrange.com. Hello, folks. It's Jeremy from Blammo. You know, the podcast you're listening to. Yep. As we wrap up the summer. Wait, are we wrapping up the summer? I mean, it's August. It's early August. This isn't the end of the summer at all, is it? Son of a... Dang it. Look, I'm just wanting the summer to be over. I'm done. I'm done with the heat. Whatever. I think I've said this the past few intros. Maybe it's because I record this after I'm burnt out from the heat. No pun intended. Bingo. Anyway, I have been continuing my obsession with music. I feel like lately I've been way more into music, specifically like what people would call classical music, right? Like very like music without words, or just, you know, putting on headphones and zoning out and just like disconnecting and having incredible experiences just listening to music. But we all know the show's about clothes. Well, more the people in the clothes. Yeah, I said it. And this week, it's the composer Timo Andres. By the way, I said Timo, not Timo. Now you know. Timo. He's performed with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Britten Sinfonia, and countless others, and also collaborated with Sufjan Stevens, Thile, the Kronos Quartet, and Philip Glass. By the way, I'll say this because he didn't. Philip Glass said that he combines a brilliant compositional mind with a wonderful sense of interpretation of music. That's about as good of a compliment as you're going to get from Philip Glass. Holy moly. He's a virtuoso on the piano and a virtuoso on the fifths. It's Timo Andres, and he's on Blammo. Timo and I chat his career and music, whether or not you need high-end headphones to appreciate classical music, his Herman Miller collection, getting fits off while slamming the ivories, and why Philip Glass thinks he's the real MVP. It's a pod for the ages. Here we go. Timo, thanks for making the time to chat.
Absolutely.
We're in your wonderful oasis of incredible design with a grand piano in there.
That's right. Yeah, that was my teacher's piano, actually.
How did you get that in this house?
It came in here very easily, actually, just through the front door. You take the legs off, you turn it on its side. You hire professionals, of course. There was one apartment I lived on the third floor of a old brownstone, with a twisty, narrow staircase, and they carried it up that, and it almost didn't make it in. It was so close. There are still marks on the piano and on that house, probably. And I remember when it was finally sitting on the floor of my new apartment, I was so relieved. I broke down and wept. It was so traumatic.
Are you an emotional guy? I mean, I feel like that's an assumption of many people who are musicians.
No, actually, I'm not. I'm usually not very demonstrative with my emotions, just because I guess I'm a pretty private person in some ways. It sounds funny because, of course, music is so emotional, and it's so much about wanting to make people feel something, both in my playing and in the music I write. I want to make people feel things, but I don't want to tell them, like, this is what you should feel.
Oh. Yeah, okay, because you'd mentioned about kind of being conscious of how someone perceives more or less the music or the art that you're playing. Like, does that, like, and I say this because I listen to a ton of classical stuff lately, and to where music for me has such a strong nostalgia and memory attached to it, that even though the point of, say, an opera or of something like this might have been completely different, where my state of mind was when I experienced it actually overcomes what the song might have even been written for. And I'm always curious, like, as a composer,
right,
does that ever throw you off?
I think it's sort of beyond my control.
Sure.
It's different for different kinds of music. I mean, you mentioned opera. I mean, of course, opera is sort of all about revealing a character's inner emotional state in sort of the most extreme way possible. I mean, there's no more extreme art form than opera in a lot of ways. with something like what I do, which is, play other composers' music on the piano and my own music.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
and I write my own music, of course. There's something about like what I'm trying to do is actually express the composer's intent as closely as possible, and as vividly as possible, and as clearly as possible. And in doing that, hope that emotional reaction is triggered in whoever's listening to it. But I'm not actually thinking, oh, this music is about this specific emotion, or I want the audience to feel such and such a way at this moment of the piece. It's much more actually, for me, sort of abstract than that, and much more sort of analytical. I'm making it sound sort of more boring than it actually is. But I think the process of interpretation and the process of kind of creating a document for other musicians to interpret is really fascinating to me. And that's sort of how, quote unquote, classical, for lack of a better word, how the classical world has worked. You mean for like hundreds of years?
You're referring to sheet music,
right? Exactly. Yeah. This sort of document that is reproduced and reproduced and reproduced. Whereas if you were, say, writing songs as a band or writing songs for you to perform in a more and you're not writing songs for someone else. In other words, I think there is more of a process of sort of getting in touch with your innermost thoughts and feelings and finding ways to express those kind of in the most visceral way possible.
Yeah.
And it's sort of another side of the craft.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back further because you're an East Coast guy, and
I was born in California, but
what?
I did. Yeah,
that's right.
But
Palo Alto.
I did grow up. Mostly in Connecticut, in the country.
Right. So, like, where did music sort of enter your life? Because I think a lot of people describe you as a virtuoso. You've gotten shout outs from folks like Philip Glass. Like, I mean, this is you're a massive deal in the world of like piano playing and composing and writing. So like,
that's very kind of you to say.
I got to connect these dots here.
I think music had always fascinated me, and there was sort of an allure to it that I didn't quite understand from when I was very young. I can remember, listening to records, listening to tapes, figuring out how to operate, the hi-fi.
What was the first record you heard?
Hard to say. I mean, it was sort of a mix of like, I'd say like some classical favorites that my parents had around the house and like children's music that they'd got me, basically. I can remember really liking Pete Seeger records that my dad had, and
there we go.
Malvina Reynolds, who was another folk singer. I think a Bay Area folk singer from around the 60s, 70s. And also really liking Beethoven. There were a couple Beethoven records in there.
A little different than some of the folk stuff.
Well, but at that point, it was all just music to me.
Sure, yeah.
And I think actually part of my life's work is trying to reconvince people that it is all just music,
Oh.
Which is something I feel very strongly. It's like, it's all just music. Like, yeah, there's good music and there's bad music, and not everything is for everyone, but it's all just music.
Do you mean like in the concept of, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I might fumble a bit here, how people view, I'm air quoting classical as something that is completely outside of
or punk,
right,
or hip hop, or like whatever the genre, whatever these boxes are, they were not things that were invented by musicians. And they're not generally how musicians think about music.
Go on.
We are the way that I think about music, and the way that almost every musician I know thinks about music, is having these very porous sort of boundaries between what different styles of music, how it may sound on the surface, the kind of spaces that it might exist in, the kind of people who might make it. We're sort of in the business of trying to see what is in common, to tie things together, to connect things, because that's sort of, anyone who makes music is always sort of looking to steal, We're always we're always approaching things, whether we know it or not, we're always approaching things from the perspective of, could this be useful to me in a way?
Oh.
And so when you start listening to music in that way, I think it's much more interesting, because you start sort of connecting the dots. You start seeing who was influenced by what, and what the sort of a beautiful mind diagram with all the strings connecting everything, and that maybe the music history that we're taught by, looking for things on Spotify or in our day, like going to record stores, or the music history that if we go to music school, this sort of linear progression of music history that we learn, that maybe that is something that's imposed from outside of music, and actually musicians themselves don't really operate that way. That we're always sort of approaching this great big pile of all the music that's ever been made and sort of rooting around in it and saying, like, what can I take? What's my own personal canon going to be?
This is an incredibly introspective discussion on something that many people view as something that they turn on so they can focus. I love it, but it looks like this was obviously refined a ton at home. What was the sort of environment you were in that was cultivating that?
Yeah, it was, neither of my parents are musicians, but I would say I come from a family of very deep music appreciators. In particular, my grandfather, my dad's dad, had a huge record collection and was an opera buff, and was sort of into the contemporary classical music of his time,
right,
which would have been, Bartok and Shostakovich and Stravinsky and Prokofiev and Ravel, Ravel was a little before his time, but so he being around him, like, he would always be sort of giving me something new to listen to, buying me a CD or recording something to tape that he thought I would like, and he took a great interest in what I was doing. I didn't start really doing music myself until I was about 7, which, sounds very young, but in the milieu of sort of classical music, you have these 3 and 4-year-old kids, like, starting violin lessons, like, going to Juilliard and stuff like that. Wasn't quite me. But my dad wrote about technology as his profession, and during the 90s was always so there was this steady stream of, like, gadgets and computer equipment and early digital cameras, that sort of thing, coming into our house for him to review, to write about.
Oh, he was like a tech reviewer?
Yeah, I guess he was kind of.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah, he sort of fell in with the early Apple crowd.
So he's like the Walt Mossberg homie sort of guy.
Well, not successful. But no, he wrote books about software.
Oh, okay.
He wrote some books about, like, Adobe programs, like, long before it was Creative Suite. He wrote, like, a book about Adobe Illustrator, like the very first version, and so there was always sort of this stuff coming through the house.
But it sounds like a very analytical understanding of art, of potential art forms, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he was someone who was, as I said, like, not really not an artist himself, but had certainly deep interests in art and design and typography and architecture and music and theater and all of these things, which of course my mom shared, and she sort of came from a family of actors and writers and critics and sort of literary people, and so there was it wasn't that I went into the family business or anything, but there was always sort of this idea in the house that, like, oh yeah, being an artist it's like something you can do.
Yeah. That's a huge thing.
It is, yeah.
Because I feel like, especially at that time too, culturally, it felt like artists were getting, especially around like the .com era of the 90s and things like that, where, renegades and the non-traditional education, they were becoming, these trailblazers of science and engineering and understanding, and people would always equate them as artists. Like, I always get frustrated when people compare someone like Steve Jobs to Da Vinci, but, like, that was a very common thing, of that time.
I was sort of, yes, I was very lucky to grow up in this very encouraging environment, where it was sort of understood, like, oh, Timo seems really serious about this music stuff. Like, let's find him a better teacher. Let's like find him a piano. Like,
was piano your first instrument?
Yes, my first and only instrument.
There you go. Okay.
So one of the gadgets that my dad was sent to review was this little electronic keyboard called the Miracle Piano Teaching System. And the keyboard, you hooked it up to your Mac, and then there was a software program that would teach you to play. Basically, it was a MIDI keyboard, so the computer could understand if you were playing the right notes or not, and in roughly the right rhythms. And it would tell you if you made a mistake. It taught me how to read music. There was a little game where ducks would swim by on a 5-line staff, and if you played the note that the duck was on, it would shoot the duck. It would sort of like explode in a little cloud of feathers.
Still ahead of its time.
It kind of was. I mean, it didn't exactly catch on. I think there was only one version of it. But of course there are, you buy an iPad now. It's like there are things that are like amazingly more advanced. Like you have a full sequencer and like recording studio in your iPad now. But at that time, yeah, I guess this would have been, 1992, 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And I became obsessed with it. I was playing, all my spare time. I started writing things down. I didn't even really understand music notation yet, but I was writing it nonetheless.
Really?
And I'd sort of draw my own manuscript paper, and it was clearly like I just took to it. And then so I finished this program. My parents got me a local piano teacher, and then another local piano teacher, and eventually it was clear, like, this teacher was Timo should really find something else. Like, and then I ended up seeing actually one of my mom's childhood friends, who she went to school with when she from the time she was very young. Her mother taught piano in New York.
Okay.
So my parents were like, "Oh, let's take Timo to see Eleanor just to see what she says, like get a professional opinion." And Eleanor became my piano teacher for the next, through high school, basically.
Oh, wow.
So from the time I was about 11, I started going into New York every 2 or 3 weeks for lessons, and then later every other week, and then every week.
And you were in Connecticut at this time?
Yeah. So at first my dad would drive me on the weekends. Later on, I would take the Peter Pan bus into Port Authority, and I'd go up to Juilliard where I was studying composition, and then I'd go up to 88th Street and take my piano lesson, and that's in the other room. That's the piano that I would take my lessons on. That belonged to Eleanor. And yeah, it was really just always a thing that was, it was the thing that I loved to do the most, and the thing that I was so obviously better at than anything else in my life. I was not good in school. I was not, I didn't apply myself, I think. Was the language that would have been used. Because I always had this thing that like was outside of school that I knew was my thing. And then the writing music sort of started out as kind of a side thing, something I did sort of on my own time for fun, and gradually started to gain an importance until it was, as important as playing the piano. And I'd say for a time more important. And that's actually what I ended up going to school in, was composing, not piano playing.
What's the difference in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different course of study, really. It struck me as sort of a lower stress and possibly more interesting way to study, just because it seemed much more open-ended. I had a piano teacher who I really loved and connected with, and I knew that playing the piano was always something that would be a big part of my life. But I also knew that if I went to a school to study piano, I'd be with some other teacher and they would want to sort of start me in their own way. And I would, at that time, all I wanted to do was sort of play like the craziest contemporary music that, no teacher would like ever agree to teach me. And, I sort of,
like for what? Like what example?
I already had my own interests. Like in high school, I decided I wanted to study this piece called the Concord Sonata by Charles Ives, early American composer, which is sort of this wild experimental piece from the early 20th century, lasts about an hour. It's like this crazy like homage to transcendentalism and Beethoven and like all of these sort of revolutionary ideas that he had. And it's not a standard piece of piano literature, shall we say. It's quite off the beaten path. It's quite the list of piano teachers who would even know it is relatively, probably more now, less 20 years ago.
Yeah, is Homie on Spotify or something here?
Definitely, yeah. So, I had already sort of worked up this big piece. I knew that that's the kind of music that I wanted to focus on, was like this sort of off the beaten path stuff.
Was there other music you were listening to that was influencing your desire to,
at that time, actually, no. That's an interesting point. Up through high school, beginning of college, I was really just like, I was so focused on the classical world and on, sort of learning more of the classical literature. And, I had this feeling of like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything, but I wanted to learn. I was so hungry for music that I was sort of just on this straight and narrow path. And I had a very sort of non-traditional schooling experience where I was just kind of around, I certainly heard like the pop music of the time that my friends were listening to, but it wasn't something that I felt like interested me yet. Mm-hmm. It was still very much like, I've got my own thing. I'm like so focused on it. I'm like obsessed with all of this, this music that I'm studying.
Did you look down on pop music?
I probably did a little bit in that way that teenagers can.
You're like, no, man, I'm in the high art.
Yeah, they think they have everything figured out, and they
sure.
I was like, no, I want to listen to like Ravel and Beethoven, and soon after that, I would say I sort of had. I realized the error of my ways. I went to college. Suddenly I was around all these people my age who were like listening to really interesting stuff that was totally off my radar, all kinds of jazz, all kinds of pop music that was, really experimental and sort of, people were like, Timo, you really have to know this. You have to they'd give me stacks of CDs. It was also at that time, I should say the height of the like iTunes, iPod era of music.
Yeah.
And
let me make you a playlist.
Yeah, and not only that, but if you were on a large network like that, there was this thing called iTunes library sharing, where you could check a box in iTunes and it would broadcast your whole music library over the network.
I remember that.
Which, in this case was the whole campus.
Right. What a treasure trove.
It was incredible. And you could just go into someone else's library and click a song and it would play. It would stream across the network. And, it was like the earliest form of streaming music, I guess. Yeah. And there were actually like pirate apps you could use to copy the song to your local, you could put it on your iPod and take it around with you. And so it was actually a way that I listened to a lot of stuff. I would sort of look in my friends' music libraries or even people I didn't know and just see like, oh, what does this person have? And it was a way that you met people too. I remember this one girl, I thought I had a pretty big music library, right? I had maybe, 60, 80 gigs of music on my laptop. Yeah, which at that time was a lot of music. This girl had like 200 gigs of music. I was like, who is this girl? I have to meet her. And it was all like all over the map. She had classical music. She had all kinds of pop music. She had like, just a lot of experimental stuff. And we met up, we became friends, it was actually like a little, it was a little local social network based around music. And so around that time, I kind of had this thought, like, cause my musical, sort of taste and my musical world were sort of in the process of being blown wide open.
Was there a particular artist that you could tie that to or even an era?
Well, it sort of had to do simultaneously with a couple of things. With first of all, with me starting to listen to minimalism, to minimalist composers, which up to that point I hadn't.
Who's a minimalist composer?
Well, again, I'm putting people in boxes because it's a convenient thing to do. And these are all very different composers, but people like John Adams and Steve Reich and Philip Glass. And
Philip Glass is minimal. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so-called. I mean, he would not use that term.
Sure.
Arvo Pärt, Michael Nyman, there are all kinds of people that I sort of went down this rabbit hole, and I sort of simultaneously started listening to like Brian Eno and
there we go.
These sort of electronic groups like Boards of Canada.
Oh, that's a big pivot.
More sort of like experimental jazz, like Keith Jarrett. And
do you ever get into like Matmos? Because I remember at that era that they were like Bjork's band, Bjork's backing band at SF.
Yeah, or for that matter, Bjork herself. I started to listen to that. All kinds of things, and I was kind of starting to do that thing where I was saying like, I see how these things are similar. I see how these things are connected. And it was sort of this way of opening my ears up little by little to sounds that might have previously just seemed like they had nothing to do with anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it. I remember very distinctly at that moment saying like, I am always going to keep an open mind to music that seems new to me. I never want to be that person who just dismisses something because I don't understand it. I never want to be that person again. I think it's made me a happier and better musician in my life to just sort of remind myself to do that. Because of course later it can get so tied up in issues of like knowing people personally or professional envy or like, having a preconceived idea of a person that is actually not really who they are. And like, or if you hear something about someone from a friend and you're like, oh, well, now I have this like preformed idea of their art in my head. It's like, well, actually, that doesn't really have anything to do with anything. Like, you should probably just like evaluate the art on its own terms and like forget what that person told you. But even beyond that, it was more just about making myself more porous to influences.
And this obviously must have affected your composition because
absolutely.
A couple other friends of mine are musicians and they're, relatively successful. I don't know how you want to describe it, but they had said that your music is the bridge of classical air quote music to like, modern music in the sense that you can listen to your compositions and it'll make you either dive deeper into maybe some of the roots or some of the Schubert or some of the other stuff, or, hear things from other eras and kind of go through that. So your music is very a bridge to a lot of these other worlds.
I think that's absolutely true. That's actually wonderful to hear. I mean, I like that. I mean, because I think through all of this, through that sort of transition phase early in college and, through my sort of musical development since, I've always, the stuff that I grew up with has always remained at the core, and I think there's something to that, like the music that you heard and listened to and loved from the time you were, say, 11, 12, 13 through 21, that's sort of the music that will always be at your core, for better or worse. That's sort of when your brain is the most malleable.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean.
It imprints on you and you know it by heart. There's stuff that I haven't touched in, over a decade that I could probably go play you by memory.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be good, but I would be able to play it. This idea of like sort of being a bridge. I love classical music. I love it deeply. And there is so much sort of, there's so much I think about the grammar and sort of the rhetoric and the way my music is structured that is directly from that. And I could try to distance myself from it, but I don't think I could ever get away with, the type of music that I write, the way my music sounds, it's like, it's a result of that, rooting around in the pile and pulling out the things that appeal to me. And that's, I think every musician working in any style who has any kind of personal voice or identifiable voice, it's the same way. It's the music they grew up with, the music they've come to love, just the stuff that they've absorbed to the point where they don't even know, they're not even thinking about it. It's just it's like so deep in a part of your brain. To you, it's just become how music works.
Right.
So it's very interesting. I mean, I think there is this idea, and has been for a long time for a number of reasons, that, classical music is this very kind of separate and intimidating and somewhat exclusionary thing, or that it's somehow intellectual, or that it's...
I think there's definitely a cloak of elitism around a lot of classical music.
Well, which it surrounded itself with willingly for a long time, sure. Which I think to its great detriment. And I think there was for a long time this idea in the culture that like classical music was sort of up here at the top of the pyramid on this kind of pedestal, and that it was somehow better,
right?
In some way, or that it was like better for you, or which I think I'm relieved to say I think that most people no longer think that. I mean, probably in some corners of the classical music world, sure, people still think that, but like, I don't think most people my age think that.
No, I agree. But I mean, I think there's something, and I apologize for asking you to explain this, but like, why is it that Bach, like, and someone like that, or Beethoven, their music just never goes away? Like it's they've in a way it's become like the standards in which a lot of people view classical music, where it's like, why is there such a staying power of something like that?
Well, I do think it's self-perpetuating in a way.
Okay.
That there is this kind of passing down of musical knowledge. That's sort of a nice way of looking at it. And I think it's good. It's actually, it's something that is amazing about classical music, is that it does have this centuries and centuries of history and of sort of inherited wisdom, and there's always so much more to learn. I think part of it is, the sort of dark side of that would be like, people like tradition for tradition's sake, and they don't really question it, and they just want to hear the things that they know, and that's how the canon becomes the sort of immutable thing that's put up on a pedestal that like you can never touch, which of course is something that's very discouraging if you're like a composer born in 1985 who like wants to contribute to this tradition.
Sure.
These
guys are 200 plus years old. What the hell is wrong?
Yeah, it's like, you can't compete.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's for one thing, a lot of the music that has persisted has been the best documented. A lot of musicians over time have kind of studied it and performed it and taught it, and so it gets passed down that way. And it's like the proverbial tip of the iceberg. It's like, for all the stuff we know that has survived all that time, there's like so much stuff that has been just lost to history, and for one reason or another, maybe the composer wasn't quite as famous. Maybe their publisher didn't like maintain their archives as well. Like, maybe they didn't have kids to perpetuate their legacy, or, any number of reasons.
Yeah. I wonder if some of that stuff has been helpful to some folks, in the sense where it's like, okay, say, imagine, Bach is around in an era of Instagram and social media, and now no one plays his music because he was an asshole to some person at a coffee shop, and Bach's canceled. Like, those people are more or less invincible, because there's also not that much personal sort of history that you can dig up about some of these folks.
Well, in the case of Bach, that's kind of true. Yeah, we just don't know that much about the guy. I mean, I'm just kind of being silly here with some of that. No, but it's an interesting point. I mean, this idea, I'd say, on the side of like more destructive forces, this idea of like composer hagiography, of like putting these composers up on pedestals and saying like, oh, this person was a divine genius, and they could never, no, these were just people. They were fallible human beings who like happened to be very good at a thing, and somehow approached a level where they managed to become so obsessed with their craft, and so so sort of single-mindedly devoted to something. that they produced work of a extraordinary quality.
Right.
And that something about that work has registered with people for hundreds of years.
Right.
You know? And I think that is largely true of most of the composers whose work we know and play now. I mean, I think it's not everything's for everyone. There are certainly quote unquote great composers who are just not for me. I think that's fine. We all sort of have to have our own personal tastes, like within what is under the umbrella of classical music. But I think the important thing is, to remain curious, to remain open-minded, to say like, oh, maybe I don't think I like, Liszt or Bruckner or like Tchaikovsky, or just to name three composers who like I would say aren't really for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I always, I'm always curious to like hear a piece I don't know by any of them, and to give it another shot, to say, oh, maybe there was something I was missing here.
Yeah.
And, I would hope that people approach my music with the same degree of open-mindedness.
Well, okay, so here's a question, and then I want to jump to close stuff. But like, if someone's going to listen to your music, are you like, you go full Neil Young and you're pissed because they're listening to it on AirPods?
No, I mean, the amount of music that I listen to literally out of my iPhone speakers is like, it's actually very it's probably bad.
So I take it you don't seem to mind that much.
I mean, I'm not really an audiophile. I mean, of course I care about like the quality of the documentation of my work.
Right. Sure.
And I am very picky about that. But yeah, however anyone wants to listen to my music, like I'm happy. Like,
so you're not like, oh, if you're not at bit rate this.
Oh my God, no! Are you kidding me? No, I mean, I put my music up on YouTube. I mean, YouTube squashes everything down. Like when I listen to one of my recordings, like in pristine, like 96-24, like on my nice.
That's basically, for those who don't know, the highest quality audio.
It's the quality I record in.
Yeah.
It's just more information. I play it back on my nice AD converter, on my nice headphones.
There it is.
It's like,
he's got the gear.
Yeah, it sounds great. It sounds better than it does on YouTube.
Sure.
And I wish that everyone who listened to it heard it that way. But like, what am I going to do?
Well, but here's the thing too, because first off, as an aside, I think people always forget that YouTube is still the world's largest music player, which is mind-boggling.
It's not surprising. Yeah.
But the fact that, so there's a lot of music that I'll listen to, and there's, I have like the casual music, right? Where it's like you're putting on an album and it's on shuffle and it's on a playlist, and the playlist is not even, relative to a specific artist. It's a theme. Right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a very casual, it's a Cracker Jack box of music. And then there's some things, and this is some of the stuff I've done lately, into which I will sit down and I will listen to an album from start to finish with headphones. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and I'm trying to incorporate that more with also a lot more of like classical stuff.
Well, it's funny because, of course, most classical music is not in albums, really. Well, I mean, some of it is.
Yeah.
Some of it is, I think, more recent stuff maybe was written to be. My first album, for example, Shy and Mighty, that was written to be an album, 60 minutes, 10 tracks, play it front to back. And then there are other things like maybe a pianist will say like, oh, I selected this particular sequence of pieces that were not written to be together, but they have something. I'm like trying to show you something by the order I put them in, kind of like programming a concert or something like that. I'd say would be an album. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, it's Beethoven 3 and Beethoven 4 on a CD. It's like, well, that's not an album. It's two pieces that don't really have anything to do with each other. So yeah, I'd say more, the album is so much more a thing when you get into like pop music, where things really were written to be albums, and you can have these sort of wonderful large form compositions. Really, it's like the equivalent of a symphony, maybe.
Oh,
where it's like,
I guess it's true.
Okay, 30-40 minute album is structured to give you this journey over a long period of time. Just in the same way that like a Mahler symphony. It was, structured to give you this emotional experience over 80, 90 minutes.
This episode is brought to you by Standard and Strange. Where are the summer fits at? Is it too hot? Look, I've always been one of those less is more folks, and I just tend to wear a bright color. Hello, yellow. But lately, I've been feeling the Joe McCoy pocket tees from Standard and Strange. They have a cherry red and a forest green, and wow, they are so good. Because it's hard to get pocket tees right. But these are 100% cotton, garment dyed, which means they're dyed after they're actually assembled, made, and they're made in Japan. Oh, and did I mention they're only available at Standard and Strange? Look, if you're still thinking, just head over to standardandstrange.com and see why they're one of my favorite shops. Their selection of denim, boots, sportswear is incredible. And geez, what other retail store donates 2% of their revenue, not profits, to giving back? I love these folks, so should you. Visit standardandstrange.com to learn more. And be sure to sign up for their mailing list so you never miss the latest dope gear they have at standardandstrange.com. It's wedding season, it's slick look season, it's feel good about yourself season, whatever season it is, you're ready for your elegant yet casual wardrobe. But you're busy. You're like me. You're running a podcast. You're burning the candle at both ends. You're arguing about the latest streaming show with your friend. Hot take, that new Star Wars show is just, okay. You're too busy. But you need to go to Proper Cloth for your new custom gear. Time to get yourself measured for a new shirt, pants, and a jacket. But by the time you're there, you ran out of time. So enter the HTO setup from Proper Cloth. That's home try on. It's super simple. Select the 2 sizes you expect will fit you best. For example, if you typically wear a size 32 chino, but a 32 feels a little too tight, order the Chino HTO kit in size 32 and 34. Place your order. Your kit arrives in a few days after a small deposit. Then you meet with a team member virtually at a time that works best for you. You try on the garments, discussing where each item fits perfectly, where they're loose, too tight, and while on the call, a custom size is created just for you. Then simply return your HTO kit and the packaging it arrived in. Now your custom size is created. Order any of your styles and your personal fit. And once you receive your first custom-made product, you're still eligible for a complimentary alteration and remake to dial in that fit. It's easy and simple and always backed by Proper Cloth's perfect fit guarantee, which means they'll remake your first order completely free of charge with the adjustments required. Additionally, their return policy allows for anything to be returned within 90 days purchase for a full refund. This is how you buy custom clothes in 2022, fam, and it's all from Proper Cloth. So visit propercloth.com to learn more. Start your process now at propercloth.com. Well, I definitely want to pivot to the environment that we're in and the environment that you compose in, because I think, I've watched a fair share of pianists play and things like that. And generally they're on the sort of Posturepedic, stools and benches. And you're the only person I've seen rocking on an Eames plywood chair.
Well, that's funny. So this chair in this room, that's the chair that came with the piano.
Okay.
It's like a little. It's not like a bench. It's like a little chair with a back.
Like a
chair.
3 feet tall, or maybe.
I started playing on the Eames chair when I started recording. Actually, when I started recording those videos, because that chair is extremely squeaky.
Oh. So it was a sonic choice. It was not an aesthetic choice.
Yeah, I was hearing the squeaks in the videos, and I was like, "Oh, do I have anything quieter that's like roughly the right height?" And so the Eames plywood chair was just sort of the thing I had at hand. It's nice and quiet.
Okay,
and I've gotten used to sitting at that height. Now, it's honestly not an ideal piano bench.
You wouldn't bring it to Carnegie Hall?
I
feel like that's your signature now.
Only if I could take the piano with me. Okay. I would take my own piano. No, I really should get a proper artist bench, because they're built that way for a reason. Like, they're extremely heavy and stable, and it's actually nice to be able to like move horizontally. Sometimes you want to sit actually like more toward the top of the piano, so you don't have to put your hands at a weird position to play something really high. Or
right.
So they're long. They're benches for a reason.
Right.
Really, the only thing stopping me is they're surprisingly expensive.
The chairs or the benches?
The real artist benches. They're surprisingly expensive, and like I guess I just don't love how they look.
Well, clearly, I mean, because we're surrounded in a incredible sort of almost mid-century wonderland of goods here, and I'm kind of curious how some of these things fit in.
Well, that was I've always really been into really since I was a kid, like my environment, like learning more about sort of the way things were designed and built, and everything from objects up to buildings and cities, and always sort of into the aspect of the visual arts that was sort of useful things, like things that were made for use, but that were also aesthetically really interesting. So, graphic design, industrial design, posters and books and typography, that sort of thing. And later clothes.
Yeah.
And the furniture thing was really something that I was interested in from a very young age. I mean, I have these, old issues of, if you remember ID magazine, not the fashion ID magazine, but the international design magazine of industrial design that I subscribed to when I was a kid.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very popular with my peers. What could I say? And so I'd always sort of had this eye out for furniture, and started sort of collecting things when I was in college, even like for my dorm room, with the idea that, eventually I'd have a real apartment, and like I would need, chairs and a coffee table and lamps and, various things. A lot of that stuff I still have, actually. I mean, this mid-century bench.
This is the Nelson bench, right?
No, it's like from around that time, but it's not, it's not as fancy. But it's something I picked up on the street in New Haven, when I was living there.
I mean,
same with this chair. This Eames, it's a shell chair with like a roller base. There's a lot of institutional furniture at universities that
they were like the biggest customer of Herman Miller.
Yeah, if they go to renovate a building from the 60s or 70s, they're just going to throw all that stuff out. Also, a lot of it was going out on the street, and I'd pick it up. Certain other things were sort of passed down to me. It was an old family friend who we had, who was sort of a mentor to me, who lived in Baltimore. And at one point, I think I must have been like moving into my first apartment or something in graduate school, and he said, "Oh, I've got a lot of old furniture down in the basement, go see if there's anything you can use." I go down there. There's all this, Nelson, Noguchi, these beautiful pieces from the 60s that were sort of, sitting under a layer of dust and mildew. And I was like, "Kenny, can I take these? Are you sure you don't mind?" And he's like, "Yeah, take them."
Wow.
I tied them to the roof of my parents' minivan, and so it's bunch of nice stuff came from that basement. And then, I've just sort of, as I needed things over the years, always sort of sprung for,
Have you bought new Herman Miller stuff?
A few things. I mean, that my desk chair, for example, I mean, that's a thing that they is from only like maybe 5 years ago.
It's like an Aeron
the
sort of
design.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called a Cosm chair. We bought matching ones during the pandemic, actually, because we're both spending so much time just like at our desks at home, and we both like would just like our spines would feel terrible.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did that, and then we didn't really buy too much furniture when we moved into this place. Maybe a couple of things.
I mean, the fact that you had that much to just furnish, because your place, it looks very kitted out in the sense that like it doesn't look like, oh, well, there's that, they just bought a place and they haven't finished that room up yet.
Well, it's sort of a work in progress, but yeah, it is. Everything has sort of been settling in. But it's more just of course I had like a bunch of IKEA stuff when I was younger, like everyone else. And as it broke and fell apart, like with each successive move,
Right.
These things don't last very long. And I'd sort of say like, well, maybe I can spring for something that's a little better to replace it, something that'll actually last me, for 10 years rather than 2 years. And, is very much sort of that same mentality at the time of, 2008 through 2012 of like, buy less but better.
Yeah. Which I think everyone took as buy more. Well, at least I did.
There's a lot. A lot of things I look back on that I'm like, well, I wasn't really doing that. But it was a mentality that was always very attractive to me.
Right.
As someone who obviously likes nice things, but also is kind of like, I'm thrifty in my way. It's like, oh, if I'm just going to have to like replace that dresser in 2 years anyway, then like, is it really such a good deal? So I subscribe to that notion very much in terms of housewares, and of course all my friends make fun of me because they're like, oh, Timo's gonna buy the most expensive thing possible. But it's not true. It's not true.
Well, I mean, and you got into clothes around this time too, or at least late
a little later. It's interesting because it was growing up, both of my parents come from the generation where they were sort of rejecting the codes of dress of their parents, growing up in the 60s and 70s. And, I don't think my dad I don't think I've ever seen him wear a suit. I don't think he owns a suit.
Oh, interesting.
He might own a couple like funny sport
weddings and
coats,
funerals sort of
like
thing.
Maybe seersucker sport coat.
Okay.
He's sort of embraced his like old man eccentricity in his dressing. But I did not grow up knowing like how a suit should fit.
Right.
I didn't have a pair of like real dress shoes like until I was really like late in my 20s. And so but it was really like a mentality where it was like, oh, if you care about that stuff, that's shallow. If you care too much about how you look, if you care too like about looking cool for your friends, like that's dumb, and you shouldn't care about that. And so that I sort of had that idea when I was growing up, like, oh, I shouldn't care about clothes. Like clothes are dumb and a waste of time.
Well, I feel like that was also. I mean, because we're the same age, and I think I don't know what was going on culturally at the time or whatever sort of culture wars were existing, but when I liked clothes, people started making fun of my sexuality, Like,
I think that was probably an aspect of it where it wasn't quite yet considered, I guess, safe for a man to like care too much about how he dressed.
Yeah, it was very taboo. And meanwhile, these are goofballs who are, buying Abercrombie and Fitch,
right? Of course,
whatever.
Like,
and so I'm like, you do care what you're dressed like
so much.
But you're wearing a jacket.
Especially as someone who very much didn't fit in growing up, as you can imagine, with the various interests. There was something about like just sort of not really putting too much effort into how I dressed that was sort of maybe more approachable. I was maybe more approachable that way. In retrospect, I was always very picky about what I wore. I couldn't have really told you why, but it was like I was very much like, oh, I like this pair of pants, but I don't like this pair. I refused to wear jeans for a long time because I mean, you remember the jeans of that era of like, sort of
I wore girls' jeans.
Late 90s, early 2000s. It was like, I mean, everyone did.
Yeah.
These really low rise things with the, just weird, unflattering stuff for like a tall, gawky teenager. And that was the other thing is like I never really found the clothes that made me not feel like a tall, gawky, awkward teenager. And so I think that's why I didn't really find sort of a personal style for myself until later. And then in college and graduate school, I'd say I dressed because at that point, I was sort of more free to buy my own clothes. And, I'd say I still didn't really develop a real personal style. I think I just sort of dressed like generic hipster culture of that time.
Were you wearing like J Press stuff? Like, did you get into the Ivy thing there? Okay.
Which is, it's funny because I was, at the sort of the
birthplace,
the birthplace of Ivy style, but I
Yeah.
didn't really develop an eye for it or a taste for it.
Gotcha.
I was wearing like sort of ironic old man stuff that I'd find at thrift stores and American Apparel stuff, and like it was very much like what like artsy kids were wearing circa 2005. And then it was real, and when I would perform, I would never quite know what to wear because I didn't want to appear like stuffy and fancy, like a quote unquote classical musician.
Right.
I very much wanted to be like rebellious, I guess.
Well, how do you wear rebellious clothing?
Well, I would wear these t-shirts. I would sort of design my own t-shirts. I'd draw on them. I'd, design my own t-shirts with fabric markers, and like maybe I'd draw like a composer's face on it who I was playing. I'd do a little portrait, and then I'd throw on like some old jacket that I got at Salvation Army, and wear sneakers, and this was.
Do you draw on your shoes?
I was never a drawing on my shoes person. I'm trying to. I mean, I guess I was wearing mostly like Adidas sneakers, like colorful Adidas sneakers at that time. And when I got through grad school and I moved to New York as sort of like let's sort of establish myself professionally out of school, and I just started to feel a little bit like I wanted people to take me more seriously finally. Here I was in the big city, I wanted to establish a career. I wanted people to know I was serious and good and like took it seriously. And simultaneously, it's just like the people around me were sort of, you're in New York, you just see people who are dressed spectacularly every day.
Yeah.
And that was something I just sort of started to notice in the way that one learns about, fonts, and you start to notice fonts everywhere.
Right.
It's like the idea suddenly occurred to me, like, oh, people are trying to communicate something about themselves or something about the world or something. There was some message behind like how these people are dressing themselves. And that was, right around that time, 2008, 2009, when I think this menswear movement was really catching steam, or probably had already caught steam. I was just a little
I think that was peak was around that
era.
Yeah,
and there was also a lot of people writing on the internet about it.
Yeah.
And so I sort of started reading, Derek Guy's stuff.
A Continuous Lane, I assume.
Yeah, never him so much, because that seemed to be more of like lifestyle stuff.
Okay.
And it wasn't really like a lifestyle that seemed like anywhere.
Yeah, you're not going to play a show in Red Wings on the piano, huh?
Right. I mean, certainly the aesthetic is like, you can't argue with it, but I was never really like aspiring to like the owning a Rolex lifestyle,
Okay.
It just didn't seem approachable to me. But I guess learning how to dress myself seemed like it could be doable.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this idea that, appeals to a lot of men about like, oh, there's this sort of systematic way of going about it that I can learn, and I can learn the proper way that a sport coat should fit. And I can learn what makes a pair of good shoes, that and then I can buy it, and then I'll be done, and then I'll have it. It'll be like I'll have the thing.
But you strike me as someone whom you can't, like, there's no point in purchasing or interacting with anything unless you either are or on your way to become a master of everything about it.
Well, I think yes, very astute. I think more what it is like I have sort of an obsessive brain.
Yeah.
And
welcome to the show.
Yeah. If I get interested in something like that, I do find myself kind of going deep.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of like, oh, I need a suit to perform, and I'll find out like how a suit should fit, and I'll buy one.
Mm-hmm.
That very soon became like, oh, I own 15 suits. Like, and I love each one.
Yeah.
And each one has its own sort of aesthetic reason for existing. And like, it really became like, it it very quickly became this thing that I was interested in aesthetically and not just like an object designed to solve a problem in my life.
Do you ever feel like, and maybe I don't want to project here because I know I personally wrestle with this sometimes the cost of these things, because they're so premium compared to, at least your experience before then, that at least for me, I feel like I need to know everything about it. So if someone asks me, I can justify why I paid that much for it, right?
Or at least justify it to yourself.
Or justify it to myself. Yeah, because I'll be like, well, no, this is blah, 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 blah. And, this is bespoke this.
No, and of course, especially at that time, I didn't have a lot of extra money.
Yeah.
And, I figured out ways around it. I was eBaying, I was thrifting, I was looking out for deals, it became this sort of pursuit that, of course, as you know, can occupy a lot of your time and mental space.
Yep.
I was flipping on eBay, like I'd go thrift stores and I learned, what could sell on eBay, and I'd flip and then use the proceeds, of course, to go toward my own wardrobe.
Oh, yeah.
And, at the height of that, I was doing, quite a lot. I was really like spending a lot of time on eBay and making a tidy amount of money.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever made money on eBay. eBay is like a toilet I flush things down. And and then also late at night, it's like my little secret drug addiction.
Well, if you factor in the net if you factored in the amount I was spending on clothes,
okay,
I was not making money.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But
understood.
It was enough so that I could, buy some nice things.
Yeah.
And, little by little, I would just sort of, I was always, I wouldn't say I ever went totally nuts, and like, I never like got an amount of money that would let me go nuts at any one time. So it was always sort of a gradual thing. And I learned little by little, like, oh, I do like this type of shirt. I don't so much like this other type of shirt.
But you got to buy those. I think people forget, at least for me, you have to buy them to get it.
Thrifting was a way to sort of try out styles, try out different items of clothing, very low risk. And, I found a good cheap tailor who I was like keeping in business. And later on, I found a very good expensive tailor who I started going to and started actually doing bespoke stuff with.
Really? Who's your tailor now?
Still the same guy, Frank Ercole, down in Diker Heights.
Yeah. Okay.
So I started going to Frank first for like if I had like a complicated alteration on like a nice coat or something that I'd found, I'd take it to him because I knew he could like recut it and do a really nice job. And eventually I said, maybe I'll try this out. Maybe I'll get myself like a nice navy blazer. And that was sort of the beginning of the end with that. But I mean, there again, it's like I would maybe get like one thing a year, maybe one suit a year from Frank. And so all of those things, there are, of course, many things I learned in the process, over those years. But all of those things I still wear and I still like.
Wow.
That's
the ultimate accomplishment.
The earlier
You've achieved
things,
nirvana.
maybe, I definitely had to get them let out a little over the years.
Sure.
But yeah, I do now have, a number of things from him that are sort of became the core of what I wear for performances.
Right.
And so that's sort of what I found I liked to perform in was just a really nice, well-fitting suit that was, appropriate for the weather, appropriate for the season, and nothing too flashy. I'm not John Batiste over here. But something that would make me feel so sort of put together and so sort of it would so it's kind of a cliche to say, but it would make me feel sort of confident in my own.
It's not a cliche.
Skin.
That's the whole point of getting made to measure and bespoke
in the way
stuff.
that like I never felt when I was growing up.
Well, of course. I mean, did you ever commission any made to measure clothing?
Of course not.
Yeah, I mean,
I barely had a shirt that fit. And so, I think the way that I dress it has changed over the years, of course. It's changed for all of us. We've sort of, all been on this process of discovery. And of course, over the past couple of years, just our lives have been so different. But I would say, I still tend to be attracted to that idea of like a wardrobe that's based around tailoring in a way.
Right.
Even though I certainly don't wear tailoring every day, far from it. Maybe I'll put on like a tweed jacket to go teach,
You teach?
Yeah, I teach composition at Manus at the new school.
Oh.
So, I'll embrace my professor
there you go.
role.
Yeah.
Put on a tweed jacket. And certainly for traveling, it works nicely. You want to have all the pockets. And I'm very particular about how I pack for a trip. But I think I've gravitated toward more sort of functional things that are utilitarian, sort of beauty and utility. Maybe less, a little bit less dandy than I was at one point, maybe.
Well, I think everyone was like that because especially if you get any made to measure or you get overwhelmed, or at least I did, overwhelmed by the options, and then you become more focused on like customizing it, I'm air quoting it, making it for you, where someone would be like, hey, Jeremy, did you know that under the collar we could change the fabric to be this paisley thing? And I would be like, right. Well, I guess I need to do that. And then you get it and you're like, why the hell did I do this?
Right. Or even when you're just looking through a book of fabrics and it's the sort of beautiful bright colors that tend to jump out at you.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, that coral red with the green overcheck. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's spectacular. And then I imagine myself sort of going out on stage in a suit made out of that. It's like, that's probably not me.
Yeah.
But
well, what's the one thing that you, even though you probably have enough, you still continue to order?
So I actually, at the beginning of 2020, so before pandemic, I sort of started 2020 being like, I'm going to try not buying any clothes this year.
No, okay. Here we go.
Because my wardrobe was so overstuffed. I had all these sweaters and pants, and it was just like, it was more that I'd like go through be doing my seasonal changeover, and I'd forget. I would literally just forget, like, oh, this pair of pants, like.
Yep. I love to shop my own closet. It's great. Yeah.
And so I sort of said, like, I'm going to spend this year just like wearing what I have and seeing, kind of refining and maybe de-accessioning. And so we all sort of know how that turned out.
Yeah.
I didn't put on a suit for a whole year, and it ended up being very easy not to buy any clothes in 2020.
Yeah.
So then I sort of said, okay, well, I'm not going to buy any clothes in 2021.
Whoa.
And I have sort of been sticking to that for better.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I mean,
we're in 2022 now.
So part of it was that we bought this house, right?
Yeah. That I'm sure that's a couple jackets worth.
So the idea of like, oh, I can't touch that money. I have to fix the plumbing,
Yeah, dude, I know that feeling. Yeah.
I got to buy a new refrigerator.
Oh, refrigerators are so effing expensive now. Don't even get me started on appliances.
Yeah, not to mention like how am I going to get the old one out? It's like,
oh yeah.
So this was sort of something, and I had always sort of had this goal in the back of my head, like I do eventually want to own a place someday. And so now that that's happened, it's sort of become a way of saying like, oh, okay, I'm not going to pay the yearly trip to Frank, to get the new suit. I'm just going to wear what I already have and sort of really refine, sort of see what I end up wearing for what purpose a lot, and then what I don't end up wearing, and I'm going to de-accession. And I actually just, I just gave 25 pieces of clothing to Matt at Lux Swap.
Oh, interesting.
So doing a little bit of.
I hope he gives you a homie deal, though. At least
I'm doing it through No Man Walks Alone.
Okay,
I am gonna have this store credit that
that's good.
I've had my eye on a couple things.
Yeah.
So I need a new overcoat. that sort of thing.
Oh, did you get the DeBone overcoat, or did you go in on that pre-order?
No, I've been wearing, again, like something I thrifted years and years ago, probably 10 years ago, this amazing Paul Stewart overcoat from 1979.
Whoa.
That
like a top coat or like a double?
Yeah, it's a double-breasted peak lapel, just navy, very, kind of your basic overcoat. It's great. But it's really on its last legs. And, I wore the hell out of it. I repaired it over and over. And, but it's like looking really shabby. It's overdue to be replaced.
Do you have a duffel coat?
There again, I have like a really old, duffel coat that was probably one of the first things I ever bought on eBay. There again, it's like it's got like toggles hanging off it, and it's got moth holes, and I still love it.
Well, it has character now. What's cool is I don't know if you ever get to go to the UK.
Well, I used to at least twice a year. That was actually a big part of my like learning to dress. Actually, was like starting to go to London.
Well, go on and tell me.
So I started going to London. I think the first time I played in London was like 2011. I was, completely obsessed with tailored clothing by then. I was thrilled that I would be able to go to London and, like just walk into all these stores that I'd read about. And
did you like go to Savile Row?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I poked around, Jermyn Street, and at that time there was no Drake's store in New York. Like, it was actually very hard to get Drake's stuff over here.
Yeah.
And they had only just started making clothing, they had only just started making stuff besides for ties and accessories. And so, yeah, I played there.
Where'd you play?
I played in Wigmore Hall, which is a beautiful
That's
little...
not a tiny spot.
Well, it is tiny physically, but it's like, it has an outsized reputation, I would say. It's a wonderful little hall, like a classical music recital hall. And, I'm sure I spent more than my fee on clothes.
That's trip. Why you do it, though. Yeah.
In fact, I think I bought this sweater.
I was going to say, that's trip. The camel hair.
This is the cashmere one.
Oh, it's a cashmere one. Excuse me. Oh, damn.
That I had sort of had my eye on. That was something that I sort of knew that was like the thing for me. But again, it was like impossible to like try one on in New York, and sort of had to go there. And again, this is something I wear, during the season, weekly, if not daily.
The house cardigan.
Yeah, and I just wear it around the house. I never wear it. I mean,
you have the house cardigan. I mean, that is.
It's just kind of the perfect thing that you put on, and it feels like you're just being hugged.
Yeah, some people have hoodies. You have the cashmere cardigan. I love it.
And so this is one of those things that, like, I guess I was sort of buying less but better.
I mean, the fact that you still have it. I mean, so I had to we went to like Easter services the other day, whatever. And I was trying to find clothes, and like, I gained a little bit of weight during the pandemic, and then I've been like trying to hit the gym more. Yeah. And I found some stuff that I wanted to wear, and I found a tie, which was like an old Drake's tie. And then I looked this was when I worked at the Armory. And so, a lot of the stuff you would kind of also, part of your compensation is you had like a little, wardrobe allowance, air quote.
That's why everyone who works there always looks so good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you kind of have to wear the stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, nobody that works there can truly afford what that stuff costs. So
also anyone who goes to work, anyone who applies to work there is already like probably obsessed with.
Oh yeah, you're bought in. Yeah. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, the pants I'm wearing are like from 2014. This jacket is from 2015. This shirt was Ascot Chang, and that said 2013. Nice. And I was like, oh, I'm still wearing all this.
I got some. I have some shirts from Carl Goldberg from Seago.
Oh yeah, I remember Seago. That was like early style form guy.
I mean, he's still going strong. Going back to like 2011 that I still wear.
I mean, that's the dream too, especially if you make it last.
A couple of them I've had the collars replaced over the years.
I've never replaced a collar on a shirt.
A couple of them he flipped them for me, so it's like worn now on the underside.
Wait, that's a thing?
Yeah.
Holy cow!
And he was happy to do it, no charge.
Wow. Is it just like a blue Oxford or something?
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
But you know, this stuff does last.
So you've been on a hiatus for nearly 2 years.
Well,
of
yeah,
buying clothes.
almost. I mean, I've bought, you know, a couple of things.
Does this count eBay?
I haven't really bought anything for me. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I've been buying LL Bean, like old LL Bean stuff from eBay.
Okay. Like knitwear or like the shoes?
No, mostly like the heavy shirts, like heavy flannel shirts.
Oh yeah.
So I realized that was something I found at a thrift store. I was just like, you know, walking by Goodwill, think I'll pop in, and I found one that was in a color that I liked.
The chamois.
Yeah, the really heavy. And I just started wearing it all the time. I wore it all the time. You know, just knocking around the house during the pandemic. I was like, these are really comfy. These are really nice, sort of insulating shirts for the cold. And so I bought a bunch of, you know, there you can find them for like $15-20 on eBay.
Probably not anymore, but
they have gotten LL Bean stuff has gotten popular.
It's hot, yeah. I try to find 501s on eBay right now.
Oh, really?
Which is hilarious. Yeah, because even it's like everybody knows that they're worth a lot, and so, but at the same time, nobody knows what they have.
Like old 90s ones.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Nobody knows. Very few people are able to like correctly date theirs. So, you know, people put Big E when it's not Big E, and people put Orange Tab when it's not, and all that stuff.
All that's I was never really a Levi's obsessive, though I do wear Levi's. And actually I think probably the pair I wear most frequently is a pair I got up at Stella Dallas.
I remember. Is Stella Dallas still around?
They're still kicking, right? Going strong.
Okay, good. Yeah.
You know, 90s-ish. Yeah. Just your basic blue jeans.
Yeah.
You know, the prototypical, like from when we were kids, blue jeans.
Yeah.
Which at that time I would not have been caught dead wearing, but now I think are really cool.
Have you ever gone the like high-end Japanese denim route?
I do have one pair from Self-Edge.
Okay.
That are, I think, sugarcane.
Oh yeah.
And those are great.
I mean, they're wearing sugar canes right now.
There you go.
These are the 66.
They look great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forget what model they are, but they're they're sort of the slimish, but not too slim. And they're black.
Black denim.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't think I've ever. I have like
got
a bunch
into
of
wearing
black denim.
I got into wearing the color black only relatively recently.
Whoa.
Because remember there was that whole thing in sort of the menswear movement about like black clothing isn't useful or whatever.
Well,
remember
and also
people used to say that?
Yeah, and but then you also had, you know, all the GQ dudes, and like Will Welch talk about this all the time, where like their uniform, I mean, okay, Jim Moore, he's got like 4,000 black Lacoste polos, a black sport coat, black jeans. Will Welch, black t-shirt, black Levi trucker, black Levi's jeans. I mean, I don't know what he's wearing now. I'm sure he's wearing different stuff, but like it then people started trying to call it out as being like, oh, that's just like a cop out because it fits and it's easy. But I feel like it's
such
coming
a thing
back
in New York.
Yeah.
Specifically that people have these sort of all black wardrobes, and it's very sort of chic and avant-garde. For a long, I mean, I love color, as you can see by like all of the like colorful things.
The Wonder
in the
Emporium
house.
home. Yeah, it's amazing.
And I forget what may have been actually a like a black cashmere turtleneck, like a roll neck sweater that I got at some, you know, like a Armory sample sale or something.
Oh yeah, okay.
And I started wearing it under an old Brooks herringbone sport coat, like a black and white herringbone. And I just found I loved how it looked, this sort of monochromatic look. And then I started like admitting black into my wardrobe more after that. And it somehow felt at the time a little less dandy and a little more serious. I was leaning into something a little, you know, in my 30s now.
Oh yeah,
and
putting away childish things.
And also just sort of like I think the mood shifted a little toward less sort of peacocky dressing. And the mood just sort of generally in the world and politically just like got much more dark and depressing and gloomy, and it suddenly started to feel like I'm dressing too like showily I should tone it down a little. And yeah, but it was sort of something I just found that I liked was I sort of started dressing more monochromatically, more sort of muted colors, and, shades of khaki, one could say.
Earth tones. Yeah.
And go all black, or sometimes I go all white. Do sort of a very, very like pale, like cream on white.
What do you have? Yeah, well, because I feel like that's like all the cool Swedish dudes will always do this sort of, very light earth tones with.
Yeah, what's that guy's name? The guy who used to sell a lot of the Eidos stuff.
Wait, you mean Agesh
in like Malmo? No, but his clothes are amazing.
Oh, Agesh from Stofa? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never actually bought anything from them, but I think that aesthetic was very it's very attractive to me.
Yeah.
That kind of dressing. Do you know this brand Husbands?
Oh, yeah, that's French brand. Yeah, I mean they're like a kind of 1970s chic sort of.
Yeah, like very interesting cuts.
Yeah, Husbands is fantastic.
Yeah, I love their stuff. And De Bonne Facture, I got really into their stuff.
Deborah, she's
sort of a little bit more minimal. Margaret Howell is someone who I've always sort of loved her whole aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I've sort of gravitated more in that, like clothes that are utilitarian but have a beauty in their sort of functionality.
There's depth to them.
Yeah, rather than being like overtly like displaying their beauty like like a loud like window pane sport coat or something, that I would have loved in like 2011.
Yeah. Well, you can kind of feels like this runs parallel to your career and confidence as an artist, right? You don't feel like your clothes need to do the work for you or anything. At least,
maybe so.
Yeah,
maybe so.
I mean, it's you exist and you're happy with your existence, so you don't have to amplify that with anything, exterior.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel a desire, because like classical music as an industry is, I have to say, not a particularly well dressed industry, especially the men.
Wait, who are the? I mean, Max Richter looks cool.
Yeah, I mean, well, but he's sort of, he's got his like. Yeah, his like artsy like turtleneck going for sure. Very minimal.
Chili Gonzalez, he's pretty out there.
Oh, totally. Yeah. But I would say his sense of style doesn't come from within the classical music world.
Correct.
He's sort of bringing it to the classical music world.
Yeah.
There are a few people who I could name. I mean, my friend Aaron Deal, wonderful pianist. But again, he dresses sort of like the jazz legends of the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
He's sort of bringing it back. But a lot of, and this is actually one of the things that's kind of great about classical music is like, you can be a completely average looking person and be a classical music star. It doesn't matter what you look like.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I think there's probably a double standard when it comes to women. I think there's more pressure on women to be, sexy and more overtly sort of like showy in how they dress. But for the most part, you can age into a career in classical music. You can sort of little by little build a career until by the time you're in your 40s, 50s, even 60s, you're suddenly like a major name.
Oh.
You don't need to hit it big when you're young. And part of that is like this emphasis of like, it's all about how you sound. It's all about how you play, how your music sounds. Like, doesn't matter how you look. It doesn't matter how you dress.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. That's something I don't think I want to change. On the other hand, classical music for a long time had a uniform. You wore tails, you wore a tuxedo.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And that sort of ended in, I'd say, like before I was in the industry.
Right.
Like I never owned tails or even a tuxedo. And I've only had to wear tails once. I had to borrow them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that even orchestras, even sort of the most like stick in the mud, like old fashioned orchestras, I think stopped requiring tails for the most part. In the
past. Do conductors? Do they have to
Some
wear
do,
tails?
older ones, but even them, like I saw,
Like Gustavo, is he wearing tails?
he may when he's conducting a gala or something, but mostly not.
Okay.
I saw Zubin Mehta conduct last week at the LA Phil. One of the most esteemed like elder statesman conductors. He was wearing a beautiful, obviously had been made for him, blue double-breasted suit.
Wait, you can be. Oh man, I gotta see this. A composer and a DB, because that feels
conductor.
Or excuse me, a conductor and a DB. That's got to be somewhat restrictive, no?
Well, and he's old. He doesn't move as demonstratively as say a Gustavo or someone like that.
Okay.
He's sort of he's sitting on a stool and he's moving his arms in a very sort of purposeful way.
Yeah,
and his body is more or less staying still.
I mean, still, that's sick though.
He looked,
DB, yeah,
he looked incredible. I mean, he looked amazing. But yeah, I think a lot of male performers were sort of left without a compass when the uniform stopped being a thing. And so now there's just sort of this weird in between situation where like you're supposed to wear a black suit and like maybe even a black suit plus a black shirt. That's like become sort of a standard thing. I know it sounds weird.
Yeah, it seems kind of lame.
And then like,
can you push back on that? Like, what is that?
I don't even own a black shirt.
Right.
Not a dress shirt. I might, I own a black knit tie, but that's the only black tie I have.
Good call.
And then the blacks don't match, the fabrics don't match, like the suit gets really shiny because it's like there's just like a really kind of sorry looking, like black on black on black look that's very prevalent in classical music. And I don't own a black suit.
Right.
I have a nice charcoal like shark skin.
There you go.
Which presents as black.
Right.
But to me it's just like it's not that interesting to look at, and it's not very flattering. Like it's a very like directional look that I think most people probably can't pull off unless they're like very, very attuned to the way things fit. And we're moving around up there, we have to have sort of freedom of movement, know. So the era of like these very slim cut tight suits like that never really worked for me.
Right.
And I don't think it works very well for you see people trying to play in those still, and it looks so uncomfortable, very restrictive.
Jeez.
So I do in a way feel like I want to sort of quietly push back on that idea that like, oh, we have to wear this sort of like contemporary music, new music, black uniform, which is, I guess you could say it's democratizing in a way, but like it's just not that beautiful to look at. And to me, it's like, yes, the music is the most important thing, but also, we're performers. We're up there. We're doing our craft. We're doing it at a very high level. And yeah, maybe it wouldn't hurt to put a little more care into, to be a little bit more interested in how we look.
Right.
So, I like to think I'm sort of quietly doing my part by, again, like wearing mostly very staid,
your rebellion is a gray suit.
Quietly tasteful suits, but like, you don't see people performing in like gray flannel suits very often.
True.
And I do have some louder suits. I have some very cool linen suits for like summer festivals and.
But you're mostly a solo performer, so right? I mean,
I probably mostly, but I do. I play with orchestras. I play chamber music a fair amount.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So one has to take into account like what other people are wearing. If everyone else is wearing black and I show up in my Dunhill one button gun check plaid
here he comes
suit,
again.
Like,
Timo's just going.
That is maybe it looks like a little bit of an ego trip on my part. So I don't.
And he brought the Eames chair too.
Yeah, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, this is great. Hold on. Before we wrap, I have a series of random questions here.
Please.
You're a YouTube guy. And,
but pretty recently, like only in the past couple years since pandemic.
Yeah, you're a new YouTuber.
Yes.
If you were making a YouTube how-to video, what would the subject be?
Well, I mean, I'm basically doing the only thing I have real expertise at already on YouTube. It's not really a how-to, but
how to play the piano.
There
you could make this in a video. There you go. It's all done.
I don't teach piano. I'm not sure whether I'd be good at teaching piano, but I did actually. I filmed a video of my friend Nico sent me he has this. He'll send me these like gag gifts every so often. Nico Muley,
okay,
a composer you may know.
Yeah.
Nico sent me. He had this. He'll sometimes send me these just like weird, like random tacky kitchen gadgets from Amazon, just like the cheapest, like ridiculous stuff you could possibly imagine. Like, so one time he sent me this. It was like a special machine for cooking bacon.
Oh, I know exactly what that is.
You drape it over the top.
Yeah, you drape it over the top
arch thing,
and then it all the bacon grease melts into the lower.
That's
pan.
the idea, at any rate. Yeah. So anyway, I did film a video of me trying out this bacon griddle for the first time.
You realize you're going full circle now. Your dad, you're reviewing stuff.
Kind of, yeah. I would like to review. Maybe I'll start a second channel that's just me reviewing cheap kitchen gadgets from Amazon.
I'm in.
This, I didn't even make it public. It's a private link. I can send it to you though. Maybe I should.
You should totally make it public, especially you're reclaiming the
actually there is a cooking show I did years and years ago, like before I had my own channel. I was a guest on a YouTube cooking show. So I do show you how to make a steak salad.
A steak salad?
Yeah.
Oh wow. That's
from the archive. That's probably 10 years old.
Damn, that's sick. What is the last movie you saw?
Honestly, it was Beverly Hills Cop.
Hell yeah.
On the plane.
Great pick. Was it on the iPad or what was it?
No, it's on Delta.
So you're the stock Delta Entertainment guy, huh?
I'm terrible at flying. I like forget to eat and I like forget to drink. I get there, I feel so shitty. But I was going to play in Beverly Hills. I had this concert in Beverly Hills and I was staying in Beverly Hills, so I was like, oh, Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, okay.
I'll watch that.
Yeah, that'll you should have watched Clueless. That would
have been another very apropos choice. I had actually
or Beverly Hills Ninja.
This somewhat, maybe it's not embarrassing. I had actually watched Clueless fairly recently on the plane. So
my wife and I watch Clueless multiple times a year.
It holds up.
It definitely holds up.
And you know what else holds up is Eddie Murphy's performance in Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a classic.
He is such a virtuoso. He's just so charismatic. He's so funny. He's so quick. It's just an amazing. And whoever else is in the movie almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree.
He's so good.
What's the last album you heard?
Last album I listened to beginning to end was probably Hijira, Joni Mitchell.
Whoa.
Which I listened to in my hotel room.
I would figure you were a Court and Spark guy.
A what?
A Court and Spark.
That name doesn't ring a bell.
Isn't it a Joni Mitchell album?
I don't know that one.
Oh, you got to dig
in.
See,
this is what I'm talking about. Is like I'm still like I'm finding out about all this stuff I missed, like in reverse.
I'm in the same like boat. I've been stuck in the 1970s for 10 years.
All like the history of popular music is basically like this still very untapped well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know stuff that I've listened to sort of scattershot,
mm-hmm.
but I didn't grow up listening to any of that stuff, and I didn't grow up with parents who listened to it, and so sort of finding it for myself has been amazing, like an amazing pleasure. I think of like hearing like U2 Joshua Tree for the first time and like having my mind blown.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that, because I have a 4-year-old and she watched the movie Sing 2, which to be honest, most kids' movies are garbage. But I would say some of the more recent movies are pretty great because they realize, adults are probably watching this with their kids. And
like the Pixar thing.
Yeah. But like Sing 2, so it's Sing the number 2. It's the sequel to the
Not
first
to be
one.
confused with Sing Sing.
Yeah. And the music in there is U2.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so it's a bunch of music. There's like Coldplay's Sky Full of Stars on there,
oh, wow.
which my daughter is obsessed with.
Good song, actually.
It's I mean, there's a catchy riff.
Beautiful.
I mean, guy listens to the pod.
Coldplay at its best. This is like painfully unhip of me to say, but like Coldplay at its best is epic.
Okay. Well, and this is the thing, because like a lot of these bands like tie into nostalgic experiences. So like Rush of Blood to the Head to me, or Parachutes, the first two Coldplay albums, are like all of these memories of me growing up. And they're me playing guitar, they're me, all sorts of stuff. And the funny thing is, because you'd mentioned Joni Mitchell, Court and Spark, my mom owns that album 4 times. She bought it, and she bought it when she knew she had it, and she kept buying it because she
bought it on LP, then she bought it on tape, then she bought it on
has CD. 4 LPs, too, wow. And she has in every available format, like, because it's such a powerful memory with her.
Wow,
and I mean, I don't really know any other art form.
It's funny, I mean, because that music for me, of course, it doesn't really have that resonance of being tied to a place or a time so much,
right?
So it's a little bit more, when I listen to Hejira, which is an album that I've known for probably a year, but that I love, or like Emmylou Harris' Wrecking Ball is another one that is, it's one of my favorites from, I'd say, the past couple of years that I've just listened to over and over and over. And it's funny, it doesn't have any like nostalgia or any sort of memory for me. And there is music that does have that, but it's more of an analytical thing at first, where I'm kind of listening to the songwriting and I'm saying like, what's she doing here? Well, like what's she doing that is unique, that's different, that like makes this music special? Because I hear, from the very first chords of Hejira, I hear something in the harmony that kind of makes my ear perk up and say, like, what are the notes in that chord? Why does it sound so? Why do I hear that chord and I know it's Joni Mitchell?
She's a phenomenal guitar player, obviously.
Well, there's that.
Her melody over guitar is
there's something
so
about the
strange.
Melodic writing. There's something about the chord voicing, and that's sort of the thing that has always attracted me to music, I think, most deeply. It sounds weird to say, but like literally just the vertical aspect of it, like what notes are sounding together,
interesting,
and in what spacing, how far apart are they, and how does that make me feel? And I think I would say the moments in music that move me the most almost always have to do with that aspect of it, some sort of particular way. What I'm describing is harmony, of course.
Sure.
I mean, some sort of particular way that the harmony twists or changes or resolves or doesn't resolve. Or to me, harmony is such a fantastically deep and powerful tool for articulating music over time, for sort of creating expectation, delaying expectation, either delayed gratification or gratification, or, whatever you want to do with it. And of course, that's something that is very much a primary concern in almost all classical music, in almost all jazz.
Right.
It's something that I think it ties a great deal of Western music together. And so that, for me, has been a useful entry point into whenever I hear a new piece of music by anyone.
Well, this ties into my last question. What is a movie or a book or a album that when someone mentions, you feel they understand you?
Well, it depends on how they mention it. If they say they hate it, maybe.
I've never heard anyone spin it like that. That's fair.
If someone says that The Unconsoled is their favorite book by Ishiguro, that's how I know. That's Ishiguro. He wrote Never Let Me Go, The Remains of the Day.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
These are sort of his most popular books, and they're wonderful. They're incredible books. The Unconsoled is probably his least popular book, but it's sort of this wild, like, experimental novel that is actually about a composer pianist. And it takes place over the course of one day. It's a very long book, but it goes through this one day in this sort of he's on this journey to try and get to the concert that he's supposed to play that night. But all of these insane roadblocks kind of keep cropping up and getting in his way, and they become progressively more and more insane. At one point, he sort of is introduced to a child that is his, that he didn't know he had, and things like this. Like,
whoa,
it's this kind of like process of like forgetting who he is almost, and it's it. I think it's a wonderful sort of like wormhole into like the ego of an artist in a way. I think it's very perceptive about that, because there is a certain amount of ego that is, I think, required to think that you can be an artist, to think that anyone would have any interest in what you're making, putting it out into the world. But yeah, that book, and there's another aspect of it, which is just sort of a funny resonance with the way that touring and like actually the act of traveling and playing concerts in place after place can feel sometimes that way, where it's like, I'm just trying to play the concert. Like, why is life so difficult sometimes? Like, why is there all this other stuff that I have to do?
Yeah.
Why am I being taken to all these different places?
Yeah.
So for that reason, it was fun to read.
Wow. Well, Timo, this was incredible. I cannot thank you enough.
Thanks, Jeremy. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, this was so much fun. We'll have to do this again soon. Thanks.
I hope so.
All right, see ya. Nice guy, right? Pretty cool. You've been listening to Blammo. We're edited by Amar Lull. Our music is by Breakmaster Cylinder, and we're produced by Blammo Media. If you like the show, tell a friend, give us some good vibes, whatever you do when you like stuff, and you can follow us online at Blammo Podcast or email us at info@blammopod.com. If you want to hang out with us, you can join the Blam Fam at patreon.com/Blammo, where we have tons of exclusive episodes and our Blammo Slack group. It's a lot of fun. Get in there, chit the chat. All right. That's it, folks. See you soon.